Okay, sorry about the glare. I'm trying to tip this so that it doesn't show. But I want to point out how to create some distant trees that are already completed, and since this painting was already done, I wanted to use it as an example. You can see that there are some trees in the far distance that are really blurred. I'm going to try to zoom in on those. Okay, so you can see that there are some in the far distance that are really blurred, and then some that are a little bit closer that have a little bit more definition. This one has a little bit more definition, this one, and then another layer in front. And these are all painted in varying degrees of the paper being wet. So these in the back are painted when the paper is at its wettest, and then I allow them to dry a little bit. I'm going to slide this over. This is in a frame, and that's why it's, I guess I just don't feel like taking it out of the frame. And these were painted when it was even a little bit more wet. And then it dries mostly, and then I paint these, and they're, just kind of wet on, mostly dry, wet on damp. And then, the front layer, these darkest ones, are painted after the paper has dried. And with just a little bit darker green, so not quite as much water. Now there are a lot of different ways to paint landscapes, and so I'm going to show you this one. I'm going to zoom out and try to tip it a little bit more so that those glares don't, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to stop those from being there. But, oh there, that's a little bit better. Okay, I can't do anything about that little blue one because that's actually the screen from the camera. But okay, that's how I did that back landscape. And then this grassy area was done in another way, and I'm going to zoom in on a section of that. Knock things off of this table doing this, but okay, so this was painted by, first, in the distance you can kind of see just kind of a golden tone painted in a lot of this area, but not in a uniform way. Like some areas are lighter, some areas are darker, but that was kind of the underlying color. And then I put in these little brush strokes when it was still quite damp, but not completely wet. And then and notice that I kind of created a transition where the brush strokes of the green kind of come down into the golden color, so I don't have just a straight line there. And then I built up little brush strokes of additional greens, made some little shrubbery that way with the same color as this, and then I pulled in some darker golden colors, put those in, and then I focused on what's called the negative spaces. Try to zoom in. Okay, so when I painted the shadows, I was painting them in between the little sections of grass, so that the lighter areas are the stems of grass, and the darker areas are the negative space or the shadows in between those. And let's see if I can move this up like this. Okay, you can see that even more down here, where the negative space was primarily what was being painted. And as you zoom out, it looks more and more like grass. And then the water has horizontal lines to create the kind of feeling of the reflection and the horizontal plane that the water creates. So anyway, I wanted to show you that, and now I'm going to show you the demonstration of how to do that. Okay, so in this painting I've already completed the sky, and it's a sunny sky. I used the wet on wet technique to create these, so I just painted the blue around them, and I did it in a couple of layers. I think I have a demonstration of that, but if I don't, or if you don't watch it, that's how I did that. When you have kind of an irregular lower edge of the sky, that's no problem at all when you're painting a landscape. Adding the blue tones to the landscape helps to unify it with the sky. It can look kind of like shadows. It's no problem at all. Whether you're working with transparent or gouache. So I am working with gouache today, so it's even less of an issue. And I'm going to try to get the lighter colors, and these are going to be kind of a yellow-green. Zoom that up so you can. And I'm going to add just a touch of this kind of reddish-brown to tone it down. See how nicely that turns it into a more kind of olivey, natural type of green? Okay, so this is the underneath layers, and you can just kind of play with the way that you want the colors to interact. We can kind of drop in some other colors. Now I'm working with gouache, but I'm at this point painting with it like it is transparent watercolor. And so it makes it a little bit more opaque, but you can still see the paper through it, obviously. I'm going to kind of darken this lower edge just a touch. Adding some darker greens. If you go like this, that creates kind of the impression of a little forest back there. If you don't, then it looks more like, you know, the savanna, or... Whoop, that's way too green. You want to capture that quality in your painting that portrays depth, because if all of this looks like it's right up close, then you don't have that kind of expansiveness that is so nice to see in landscapes. Of course, there may be some times when you do want it just to look real close up, but in general you want to include like distance, and then kind of a middle area, and then some foreground. You can leave one of those out for effect though. Alright, so I'm just going to let that dry, and then after that dries I will add some more details. Okay, so this has dried a little bit. It's only been a few minutes, and some areas are still wet. Really depends on where the water was puddling and everything. I'm going to zoom in because I want to show you a couple things that are fun in painting with watercolor or gouache, and they can help you in kind of brainstorming as you're painting. Okay, do you see how this line here that comes down into the yellow that continues the sky originally, how it creates this kind of wobbly line here? I really like that, and I'm actually going to use that as the definition between the background and this foreground area, and I'm going to turn this into some grasses that are growing kind of close up to the viewer. And then if you notice over here, and I don't know if you can see if there's a glare, I'll try to tip this down a little bit. There's once again kind of an area right in here that has the sky underneath, and so it's a little bit darker, and then here it's a little bit lighter and golden. To me that looks kind of like a meadow that is starting here and then it kind of curves around, and that's kind of the middle ground, the middle ground there. And so I'm going to use that as the kind of basis for that middle area. So this is going to be the background, this is going to be the middle ground, and then I'm going to blend this close-up grass into that background area so that it'll be obscuring most of the middle ground, but I'll probably indicate a little bit of a definition between those two. So I just wanted to point that out. Watercolor is very fun that way because you do layer, and you can find some pretty fun accidents. So in order to kind of pull this blue into this area, I'm going to work on the negative spaces and just take those colors and pull it down. And then I can, kind of add some transition between the background and the middle ground here with the same kinds of brush strokes. So I'm blending the background into, whoops, that's way too blue. But I'm not going to get rid of that because it, sometimes those colors that don't quite work for it in general work great for little tiny parts of it. Gives you a little bit of variety. Notice that in this middle ground I'm actually going side to side instead of up and down. That's to kind of indicate a flat, meadowy area rather than trees or things like that. And it helps create a little bit of a contrast too. If you end up with a little bit too much color in one area, you can take a little tiny piece of paper towel and blot that out. Kind of helps. Okay, so I want those grasses to kind of go down in so that they're not all going straight across. There's a little bit of variation in where they are in the picture. Alright, so then we'll let this dry and we'll add a few more details and a little bit more contrasts and, modify some things that might be not quite the way we want them to look. Okay, so this is all dried. It's completely dry. Yeah, it's completely dry. And I actually like the textures and stuff in the foreground for the most part. And the only real area that needs some additional detail is this middle ground here, just to kind of differentiate it from both the foreground and the far distant background. And that's, I mean, it isn't essential to differentiate it more completely, but I just like to have it a little bit more. So I'm going to use some, instead of adding paint, which I could do, and that would be a fine approach, but since I haven't shown you how to combine the colored pencils and the watercolor, I thought this would be a good opportunity to do that. So you can just kind of layer. Notice I'm not, just pressing hard and making single lines, but rather I'm kind of going over the area and kind of blending it out. And the whole thing is dealing with contrasts, okay? I'm trying to increase the contrasts. So this area is a little bit lighter than the background or the foreground, and the foreground. What I'm also going to try to do is, the background also shouldn't be real dark, but I'm going to add a little bit more color to just kind of mute some of the brighter colors and create a little bit of shadow in between. And we can add a little bit of blues and then go over it with the white. The white, once you have color down, you can press harder with the white, and that acts as a burnisher, and so you're kind of pushing down and blending all of those colored pencil layers into each other and blending it. Let's see, this brand of colored pencil is considered to be oil-based, and I honestly don't see any difference. Well, I see a little bit of difference between this is a Prismacolor and this is this other brand. This is wax-based, this is oil-based. If anything, the oil-based is a little bit harder, but they act pretty much the same. I mean, other brands might be a little different, I don't know, or different techniques. So I'm just going to kind of accentuate a few of these shadows, but not a lot of them. And I'm trying to use the same color for the shadows that I have in the sky. Some of them are going to be a little bit darker, but because this is kind of a bright, crisp, clear day for the most part, these clouds are kind of high up in the sky, and so there's a lot of ambient light and a lot of sunshine. The shadows aren't going to be like real deep and velvety. If there was a really strong light source, like when the sun goes down a little bit off to the side, then it'll feel a little bit, you'll want more striking dark colors, but I want to keep that kind of crisp, bright, almost spring-like feel. So I'm using this, it's more of a cool cobalt type blue. And I want to put a little bit of a golden tint to this too. So I put the white down to kind of create some contrast, and now I'm adding some yellow to just add a little bit of color and intensity in contrast with these in the back. And I'm going to use this kind of springy green as well as it comes forward. And then I'm just going to use the white again. You can actually get a colorless blender that is just wax, and if you don't want to lighten those tones at all, then that's probably the best choice, but I still do want to lighten these a little bit, so I'm going to... Okay, so that is my landscape, and you can see it didn't really take that long. It's there's not much of it, and it's not real detailed. But I'm going to zoom in just so you can kind of see. Okay, so that's the this approach to creating a landscape. And this is definitely not the only approach. One thing that you will come to realize the more you paint and combine different media like colored pencils and oil pastels and chalk pastels and paint and all these different approaches, is that you can kind of apply the media, different media, to the same techniques, or same techniques to different media, and just really explore and experiment with it, and you can come up with your own approaches and your own ways of portraying grass and your own ways of portraying trees and things like that. But this is just one way, and it hopefully will give you kind of a head start on feeling excited about painting landscapes.